I won't pretend to know what's going on here, but we need to take these kids to Darkstar, meowed Eeltail. She needs to know about this. For a moment, Appledusk looked as if he was going to disagree. Then, he nodded. You're right. Come on, we'll take one kid each. Mapleshade, follow us. The River Clan warriors gently picked up the drenched little shapes and carried them slowly back along the shore. Mapleshade stumbled behind them, too numb to think clearly. Beside them, the river had calmed and lapped at the shore like a cat's tongue, making soft, comforting noises in the still air. Mapleshade waited for Appledusk to send the other warriors on ahead, to find some excuse to be alone with her, so that they could mourn their kids together before facing the rest of his clan. But he didn't turn back to look at her. He hasn't even asked what I named them. The warriors threaded between tall reeds on a narrow path of dense brown soil. It opened into a clearing, which was raised up from the water by heaps of more soil on top of tightly woven branches, like a huge nest. Mapleshade caught the glint of many pairs of eyes watching from amongst the reeds, and her wet fur bristled. An orange she-cat ran up to Appledusk. Mapleshade recognized her at once. It was Reedshine, the warrior who had been fussing over Appledusk at the gathering. "Did someone fall in the river?" Reedshine gasped. "Are you okay?" The River Clan warrior set down Petalkit's body as gently as if she was sleeping, and touched his tail to Reedshine's flank. "I'm fine. I need to speak with Darktail." Reedshine stayed where she was, her gaze flicking to Mapleshade and back again. "Why is she here? What's going on, Appledusk?" There was a stir of movement at the far end of the clearing, and Darkstar stepped out of the reeds. All the cats fell silent. Appledusk stepped forward. "3 kids have drowned in the river," he announced. "Ask me their names," Mapleshade screeched silently. Appledusk looked at his paws. "I am their father." Mapleshade held her breath. This was Appledusk's chance to plead for mercy on her behalf, to explain that Mapleshade deserved to be given a place in RiverClan because she had borne his kids. Darkstar's eyes narrowed to tiny slits. "What do you mean, Appledusk? What are you talking about?" I'm so sorry, Reedshine," Appledusk whispered. "Please forgive me." Reedshine twitched the tip of her tail. "Forgive you? For what?" Mapleshade looked at the concern in Reedshine's eyes and felt something inside her turn to ice. This was not just a clanmate to Appledusk. Appledusk bowed his head and went on. "Many, many moons ago, I met with Mapleshade in secret." There was a gasp from his clanmates, and one of them, a rumpled old tabby, hissed, "Traitor!" Mapleshade kept her gaze fixed on Darkstar. "She has to take pity on me. I have lost my home, my kids. I have nothing left except Appledusk." "You knew about these kids?" Darkstar asked, the tip of her tail twitching. Appledusk nodded, and Reedshine let out a soft wail. "But Mapleshade told me she would raise them in ThunderClan," Appledusk mewed. I knew I had made a mistake, so I just said nothing to my clanmates." "A mistake?" Mapleshade almost winced at the pain in Appledusk's pale green eyes. Almost, but not quite. The ice was spreading through her faster than a leaf-bare frost. "Soon, I won't be able to feel anything," she thought. "I should have never betrayed my clan by meeting with Mapleshade," Appledusk went on, "and I will regret it for the rest of my life. I can only beg you for your forgiveness." "What brought the kids here tonight?" Darkstar queried, looking down at the 3 pitiful shapes. Mapleshade opened her mouth to explain, but Appledusk spoke first. "Mapleshade's clanmates learned the truth, and she had to leave. The river is flooded, and the kids, Well, they were too young to swim across. His voice faltered. Mapleshade stared at him. You're making it sound as if it was my fault. Darkstar mewed. The loss of any kits is a loss to all of us. But you broke the warrior code, Appledusk. How can I ever trust you again? Reedshine padded forward until she was standing alongside Appledusk, her fur brushing against his. If I am willing to forgive him for his past mistakes, then so should you, Darkstar. There were murmurs from the cats at the edge of the clearing. They sounded impressed by Reedshine's confidence. Darkstar waited until the clearing was silent again, and then nodded. This is not the season for losing warriors. Appledusk, I believe you are sorry for what you did, and that you have been punished enough by the death of your kits. I will allow you to remain in RiverClan, but know that I and the rest of our clanmates will be watching you. You will have to earn back our trust. Appledusk dipped his head so low that his muzzle almost touched the reeds beneath his paws. I will never forget your mercy, Darkstar, he murmured. Thank you. I promise that my loyalties lie only with RiverClan and my clanmates. He glanced sideways at Reedshine, who blinked at him. Darkstar gestured with her tail. Rainfall, help Splashfoot and Eeltail bury these kits. The accident of their birth is not their fault. They may lie in peace in our territory now. Mapleshade struggled to find her voice. What about me? She croaked. May I stay here with my kids? The RiverClan leader stared at her. No, you may not. You will leave this territory at once, and never set foot across the border again. Like Appledusk, I believe the loss of your kids is punishment enough. Otherwise, rest assured, my warriors would have clawed your fur off for what you've done. Night is falling, Mapleshade protested. Where will I go? Appledusk, help me! The pale brown warrior shook his head. Why should I? It's your fault that these kids are dead. I never want to see you again. Reedshine pressed herself even closer to Appledusk's flank. Go away, Mapleshade, she hissed. You've caused enough trouble tonight. Mapleshade looked down at her drowned kits. I cannot leave them, she whispered. They are everything to me. And now, they're dead, Appledusk growled. Be thankful that we've shown you some mercy, Mapleshade. Now get out, before we make you leave. Mapleshade stared at the cat whose face had occupied her mind for so many moons. She thought she had known every swirl of his fur, the angle of every whisker. But now, she didn't recognize him at all. The coldness swelled inside of her until she felt it burst out of her eyes. There was a jolt of satisfaction as Appledusk flinched away from her gaze. You told me you loved me, Mapleshade hissed. I went through the agony of bearing your kits, and now you treat me worse than prey. You will regret this, Appledusk, and that is my last promise to you. She turned and stumbled out of the clearing, blindly following paths through the reeds until she reached scent markers that suggested she was out of RiverClan's boundary. She was dimly aware of crossing a hard gray stone. Then a massive shape loomed out of the shadows. A sharp-edged two-legged den of some sort. She found a hole in the wall and slipped through into a musty, hay-scented space. Mapleshade slumped down on a clump of dusty, dried stalks and shut her eyes. Sleep dragged her away, and her dreams were filled with the sight of her kids spiraling away from her in churning black water, screeching for a help that never came. Mapleshade fought her way out of sleep, coughing and scorched with fever. Where am I? She struggled out of her prickly nest and looked around. A fresh killed mouse lay beside her, and Mapleshade's belly rumbled. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. She bent down to take a bite. Then, the memory of where she was and what had happened flooded over her, and she retched violently. My kids! Apple Dusk.
Hello? Are you alright?
An anxious mew made Mapleshade look up. A small black and white Tom was standing at the foot of a huge stack of hay that filled the den. Daylight filtered through the cracks in the wooden walls, highlighting tiny specks of dust that floated in the air. Where am I? Who are you? Mapleshade rasped. The little cat picked up a bundle of dripping moss that lay at his paws and carried it over to her.
You need to drink,
he urged.
My name's Marla, and this is my barn. You went to sleep so quickly last night that I didn't have time to introduce myself. How you feeling?
He peered at her, and Mapleshade shied away.
You still look exhausted,
Myler observed.
Eat the mouse and I'll let you get some more rest.
I'm not staying, Mapleshade hissed. I don't want your fresh kill.
But there's plenty to share,
Myler insisted.
I can catch more for myself. Don't worry.
Mapleshade staggered forward, almost knocking the Tom off his paws. Leave me alone, she growled. I don't need your help. She searched for the gap in the wall she had come in through. Behind her, Myler was meowing something about giving shelter to strangers and having plenty of room in the barn. Mapleshade didn't bother to listen. What could some kitty pet possibly give her? My life is ruined. I did nothing wrong, and yet I have lost everything. The image of her 3 dead kids hovered at the edge of her vision, as if she would be able to see them clearly only if she turned her head fast enough. Mama, help me! They wailed. I can't, Mapleshade whispered. Oh, my precious loves, I am so sorry. Trembling with hunger, Mapleshade plunged into the wispy undergrowth that edged RiverClan's territory. She stayed well clear of the border as she headed uphill, toward the gorge. She knew that there was a wooden 2-leg bridge just below the sheer walls of the rock, where she would be able to cross back into ThunderClan territory. She felt an irresistible pull inside of her, back to the place where she had spent her whole life. There was no solace in the spindly willows of RiverClan, and the vast open moor that stretched up above the gorge made her shudder with fear. Instead, she yearned for the denseness of sturdy trees and thick green undergrowth rooting her to the ground, filling her senses with familiar sounds and scents. Mapleshade reached the wooden bridge and raced across, ears flattened and fur spiked. The noise of the river tumbling below dragged her mind back to the moment that she'd let go of Patch Kit. The water, it was too strong. It's not my fault that my kids died, she reminded herself. She jumped off the bridge onto dry, sandy ground that sloped up towards 4 trees directly in front of her. If she turned and followed the river downstream, she would be in ThunderClan territory. Trying to ignore the sounds of the water, she took a few steps towards the boundary, already tasting the scent markers on the still air. Then, she froze. She could not cross the border. She had been driven out, exiled by her own clanmates. If she took one step into her former home, she would be treated worse than a rogue. An image swam into Mapleshade's mind of a small black cat, eyes narrowed with suspicion, spouting words that rang with righteous indignation. Raven Wing. This was all his fault. He had jumped to conclusions, shattered the clan's trust in her, forced her clanmates to judge her for something beyond her control. Because of his actions, Hatch Kit, Large Kit, and Petal Kit had died. Every breath that Ravenwing took was a breath he had denied Mapleshade's kits. Rage swelled inside of Mapleshade's head until the sounds of the forest faded away and her vision blurred. She stumbled along the edge of the border, not caring where her claws scraped on stones or brambles dragged on her pelt. Her skin throbbed with heat. and she was dimly aware of being thirstier than she had ever been in her life. But even when her paws splashed through a tiny stream, she couldn't muster the energy to stop and drink. Eventually, she could walk no farther, and she flopped down where she was, in a narrow ditch beside a holly bush that smelled of home. Mapleshade dropped down the steep slope into the hollow, paused briefly to look up at the 4 gigantic oaks, then carried on, scrambling up the other side and plunging into the trees that bordered WindClan's territory. There was a strong smell of fox, which made her fur prickle, but it was stale rather than fresh, and would hide her own scent from curious border patrols. She felt rather than heard the thrumming of terrified paws over the ground. Peeping out of the bracken, she saw a rabbit hurtling across the moor towards her, pursued by a patrol of WindClan cats. Mapleshade hardly had time to think before the rabbit ran straight into her in a tumble of paws and fur. She bit down hard on its neck and it went limp. The warriors were still racing towards her, so Mapleshade grasped the rabbit in her jaws and hauled it up the nearest tree. Her claws tore on the smooth bark, and the rabbit dragged at her teeth. But at last, she reached the lowest branch and crawled onto it with her fresh kill. She heard the WindClan cats scramble to a halt below.
"Where'd the rabbit go?"
asked one of them. Another was circling the trunk, sniffing the ground. "Oh, well, the trail ends here. But that's impossible. Rabbits don't climb trees."
"I don't know how you can smell anything,"
grumbled an old Tom with patchy brown fur. Mapleshade thought his name was Midgepelt.
"It stinks of fox round here."
Mapleshade held her breath, waiting for one of the cats to look up and see her. There was little leaf cover this far down the trunk, and she couldn't climb higher without making a noise. But the patrol sniffed around for a moment more, and then headed back out to the open moor, grumbling about vanishing prey. Fools, Mapleshade thought as she bit into the rabbit. She spent the night under a clump of ferns a little deeper into the forest. She woke shivering beneath a light coat of frost, missing the warmth of her kits. "Wherever you are, I hope you're warm," she thought through chattering teeth. Her belly was still full from the rabbit, so she headed straight into the open, hoping that it was too early for the WindClan dawn patrol. She had traveled to the Moonstone once before, as an apprentice. Mapleshade remembered her excitement at being inside WindClan's territory with impunity, how she had longed to be seen by a patrol and challenged. But now, she darted from rock to clump of gorse, cursing the lack of cover on the empty moor. At last, she reached the foot of the slope and crouched beside the thunder path. The stench of the monsters caught in her throat and made her eyes water. But there were few of the noisy beasts around this early. She only had to wait a few moments before silence fell heavily in the valley, and she was able to dart across the hard black stone. On the other side, she plunged through the long, soft grass and into a hedge. She recalled passing a 2-leg den with cows and a dark, hay-scented barn, where she and other apprentices had paused to hunt. She decided to stay well and clear this time, in case she ran into any of the other medicine cats traveling early to the Moonstone. After crossing a broad expanse of grass and pushing through another hedge, Mapleshade saw the dark brown tops of some 2-leg dens that looked like a barn. She swerved to the far side of the next stretch of grass and trotted through a row of trees to where the ground started to slope steeply up. Tilting back her head, she stared at the jagged rocks that marked the top of the ridge. The sun was striking them, turning them rosy and warm-looking, but their outlines still looked like teeth against the pale sky. Mapleshade's belly rumbled, and she realized that if she didn't eat now, she would be hungry for the rest of the day up on the hillside. She ducked back under the trees and quickly picked up the scent of a mole snuffling in the sunshine. Not her favorite fresh kill, but too easy to miss. She struck the flattened black body with her front paw and tucked in for a meal. Afterward, she felt stronger, clear-headed. She bounded up the side of the ridge, scattering loose pebbles under her paws. As the weak sun set the jagged stones ablaze, Mapleshade leapt onto a boulder and opened her jaws to screech at the valley below. "I'm ready for you, Raven Wing." You will pay for what you've done. The life that she had known was over. If she couldn't be a warrior, then she would dedicate every beat of her heart to avenging the deaths of her kits. The sun dragged slowly across the sky. Mapleshade's belly was still full. Besides, she was too tense to eat. Her claws were blunt after her long day of walking, so she sharpened them on a stone. A hawk swooped overhead, and Mapleshade imagined it, feasting on Ravenwing's body after she'd finished with him. He would bleed a river of blood, every drop spilled, for her helpless kits. At last, the sky faded, and the shadows between the rocks grew thicker. Mapleshade fluffed up her fur against the chill, and crouched on top of a boulder, watching for any sign of some movement at the foot of the hill. Suddenly, a darker shadow flitted across the grass. Ravenwing was here, alone and early, as he usually was. Mapleshade unsheathed her claws and let them scratch against the stone. She stayed very still, hardly breathing as Ravenwing climbed up the slope towards her. Mapleshade tensed her hindquarters, ready to leap down onto the medicine cat. But then, she paused. If she attacked him out here, she might be seen by the other medicine cats. And where was the satisfaction in a simple ambush? She should follow Ravenwing down to the Moonstone and tackle him there, at the very source of his precious omens. Mapleshade pictured the long, stifling tunnel from her visit as an apprentice. Her pelts prickled at the thought of entering that darkness again. But then, the wails of her kits echoed in her ears, and she slid soundlessly off the boulder, just a heartbeat before Ravenwing padded past. Mapleshade could hear him, breathing heavily after the climb. She waited until he had vanished into the gaping maw of Mothermouth, before slipping out and trotting after him. The hole swallowed her up at once, thick black shadows pressing around her, until there was no glimpse of moonlight when she looked back at the entrance. Mapleshade padded over the stone floor, trying to keep her paw steps as light as possible. But Ravenwing must have heard something, because he stopped, invisible in the dark ahead of her, and called out, "Who's there?" Mapleshade froze, convinced that her heart was thudding loud enough for the medicine cat to hear. But after a moment, Ravenwing carried on, his paw steps the softest whisper in the silence. Faint gray light appeared ahead, silhouetting the medicine cat's ears. The Moonstone. Mapleshade realized that she dropped into the hunting crouch and was stalking forward one step at a time. Her tail flattened behind her. She reached the opening of the cave and almost gasped out loud at the sight of the Moonstone glittering in the silver light. Ravenwing knelt in front of it, his head bowed. With a hiss, Mapleshade sprang forward, claws extended. She landed on his back, sending him rolling onto the smooth, cold stone. She caught a glimpse of his eyes, bright in the reflected moonlight. "Mapleshade!" Ravenwing choked. "What are you doing here?" Mapleshade let her claws sink into the fur around his throat. "Avenging the death of my kits! If I could kill you 3 times over, I would." She knew she had nothing to say to the medicine cat. Nothing would bring back her kits. He simply did not deserve to live when they were dead. She bit down on Ravenwing's neck, and the black cat went limp beneath her. There was the sound of paw steps approaching down the tunnel. Mapleshade let Ravenwing fall to the floor and slipped behind the crystal. "Great Star Clan!" She heard Larkwing, the Wind Clan medicine cat, hiss. "Ravenwing! Oh, what happened?" A grunt came from the cat peeking around the Moonstone. Mapleshade saw Slowfur, the Shadow Clan medicine cat, sniff at Ravenwing's unmoving body. He's dead," Slowfur announced in horror. He looked around and Mapleshade ducked behind the crystal. "We can't leave him here," meowed Larkwing. "Come on, help me get him back to the surface." Mapleshade listened to the sound of them dragging Ravenwing up the tunnel. She waited until the rays of the moon had slid past the hole in the roof, and the cave was plunged into darkness. Mapleshade's heart pounded. But, she reminded herself, she had nothing to be afraid of. The only dangerous thing in the shadows was her. She wondered if the medicine cats would continue with their gathering, but they did not come back to the cave. Mapleshade figured that they had returned to their clans to deliver the terrible news. When the tiny patch of sky above the hole turned white with dawn, Mapleshade stretched her cold, stiff legs and padded back up the tunnel. Outside Mothermouth stood a heap of small stones that had not been there before. A tuft of black fur poked through a gap in the pile. Mapleshade sniffed and recognized Ravenwing's scent. Rather than carry him all the way back to the forest, his fellow medicine cats had decided to bury him here, marking his final nest with a careful mountain of rocks. Mapleshade curled her lip. What memorial was there to her kids? Nothing but cold, wet dirt inside RiverClan's territory. She struck out at the pile of stones, knocking them to the ground. Her claws caught on the rocks and her pads stung, but she kept flailing until the heap was destroyed, and Ravenwing's body was exposed to the gray dawn. Mapleshade looked up and caught sight of a hawk circling overhead. "Here's your next piece of fresh kill," she thought with satisfaction. The hawk swept closer, and Mapleshade bounded away from the scattered stones. She bounded down the hillside without looking back. She had avenged her kits. "Were you watching, my precious kits? I killed him for you. I hope you never see Ravenwing in StarClan. He should be in a place of no stars for all eternity." She reached a hedge at the edge of a stretch of thick, soft grass and crawled under the branches. Suddenly, she was too tired to walk or take another step. Ignoring the rumbling in her belly, she closed her eyes. "Mama, help me!" Two drenched faces appeared in front of Mapleshade, eyes huge and pleading, mouths open in tiny wails. The sound of the river roared in Mapleshade's ears. "Patch Kid! Petal Kid!" she screeched. She thrashed with her front legs, trying to reach them as the water sucked them away. But her paws thudded against cold, hard earth. Mapleshade opened her eyes. She was lying under the hedge beneath the high stones. Why had she dreamed of her kids? And where was Large Kid? "Mama! Save us!" Two voices echoed again. Mapleshade shook herself and sat up. Ravenwing had died. Did that mean that only one of her kids had been avenged? StarClan, why are you doing this to me? I fell in love, that's all. And now I'm made to suffer more than any cat before. And now I am made to suffer more than any cat has before. An image drifted into her mind of a pale brown cat sitting among the ferns, looking out at a churning black river as it swept three little shapes away. Frecklewish. According to Nettlepaw, she had seen the kids struggling, but had done nothing to save them. They may not have been Frecklewish's kin, but the warrior code said that no kin should be left in danger, regardless of the clan. Frecklewish needed to pay for the lost kits, just as Ravenwing had done. Mapleshade stood up, shaking on exhausted paws. This would be harder to achieve, because Frecklewish only left ThunderClan to go to gatherings, when she would be surrounded by her clanmates. And even inside the border, she was rarely alone. Mapleshade needed to find a way to attack her within the territory, the safest place for a warrior to be. Thinking hard, she started to pad along the bottom of the hedge. A tendril of ivy caught at her foot and almost tripped her. Hissing, Mapleshade snatched her paw away. The ivy lay on the ground, quivering like a glossy green snake. Snake rocks. Mapleshade pictured the nest of adders that had been blocked in with stones. Perhaps there was something deadly inside ThunderClan's borders after all.